Welcome, Secret Friends, back to the Secret Friends Unite Spotlight interview segment. I am agog with the amazing guest that we have today. First and foremost, as usual, I'm joined by my wingman, Peter Stein. Peter, good evening.
Good evening.
And quite a gentleman who agreed to sit down and talk with us, author, director of many, many years in the entertainment industry, Mr. Nicholas Meyer. Good evening, sir. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm very thrilled to be invited.
You bet. I scarcely know where to begin. One of the main focuses of our network is a show that Peter and I do called Code 47, where we talk about Star Trek. You are the director of arguably two of the finest of that series, and really of the series in general. I'm just an absolutely enormous fan of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, but we will get to talking about that in a little bit, because front and center, I know clearly a passion project of yours, something you've done for many, many years, is writing about the great detective Sherlock Holmes. You have a novel coming out here almost immediately next week, by what you have told me. Your sixth novel, Sherlock Holmes and the Telegram from Hell. Wow, everything's in a title. That is fantastic. Yes, if you're watching our YouTube, it is right there. Being published, as I said, the end of August by Mysterious Press. So, Nick, first and foremost, tell us about Sherlock Holmes. We all obviously know Sherlock Holmes from the history of literature, but tell us about your background with the character.
Well, I started reading Holmes when I was about 11 years old. My dad gave me the complete 56 short stories and the 4 novellas, and they don't call it an impressionable age for nothing. I think I was very impressionable. And the things that happen to you, in your childhood, whether it's movies or books or people or scenery or experiences, roller coasters, what have you, those things imprint really deep. And I gobbled up those 60 stories, and then, like everybody else, was sort of shocked and depressed when they ended and there weren't any more. And so as a kid, I fooled around with writing my own imitations, and I don't want to describe it as a mania because they'll come and take me away, but it developed into something, and it got a little bit compounded in high school when people would say to me, "Oh, your old man's a shrink. Is he a Freudian?" And I didn't know, so I said, "Pop, are you a Freudian?" And he said, "Well, it's kind of a silly question." I said, why is that? And he said, because it's no more possible to discuss the history of psychoanalysis and not start with Freud than it is to discuss, say, the discovery of America by Europeans and not start with Columbus or the Vikings, if you want to get cute. But to suppose that nothing has happened since the Vikings is to be pretty rigid, pretty doctrinaire. When a patient comes to see me, I listen to what they say. I listen to how they say it. I'm very interested in what they don't say. Are they on time? How are they dressed? What's their body language? I am, in short, searching for clues from them as to why they are not happy. And I said, "Gee, Pop, that sounds like detective work." And he thought about it. He said, "Well, I guess it is like detective work." And then I sort of found myself wondering, well, gee, no wonder my dad has always sort of reminded me of Sherlock Holmes and vice versa. And so I started wondering, and maybe at this point I'm 16, 17, how much Holmes' creator, Arthur Conan Doyle, knew about the life and writing of Sigmund Freud. And the first thing you realize is, oh, they're both doctors. Oh, and they both died in the same town. Oh, and it's within 9 years of each other. Oh, and Sherlock Holmes is a cocaine addict.
Oh, boy.
And so for a time was Sigmund Freud.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, Freud got interested in cocaine because two doctors in Vienna, where he lived, at the time. Koenigstein and Kohler were using cocaine as an anesthetic during eye surgery. And then I learned that Dr. Arthur Conan Doyle studied ophthalmology for 6 months in Vienna. So I'm being pummeled by these coincidences. And then I learned somewhere along the line that Sigmund Freud's favorite bedtime reading was Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it took another 10 years, but I finally wound up writing the 7% Solution. And then that became, surprise, the number one best-selling novel in the United States. And then they made the movie, and I got to write the screenplay, and then the screenplay got nominated for an Oscar, and and then they wanted a sequel. So I wrote the West End Horror, which is pretty good, actually. And then, 20 years go by, and something I was working on fell apart, a movie, and I needed to make some money. So I was in a bookstore and not knowing what to do, and I suddenly see the novel of The Phantom of the Opera.
Mm-hmm.
I realized I had never read the novel by Gaston Leroux. So I'm looking at the introduction, and somebody says, well, how come Sherlock never met the Phantom? And I go, whoa, I think I know what I'm doing. And so that became the Canary Trainer. That was number 3. Then another 15 years go by, and amid the rise of anti-Semitism, I become very interested in the most famous and vicious hoax of all time, which is the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And I thought, gee, the dates work pretty right. Why not put Holmes up against the Protocols? It's a case that he loses because the Protocols are still around. But then after that, my agent said, well, what about Holmes in Egypt? And I thought, oh, great. Howard Carter, mummies, whatever. And that became The Return of the Pharaoh. And then this one, I don't want to say too much what it's about, but it's about a real telegram that had very far-reaching, you might say, world-shaking events. Ooh. Sherlock Holmes and the Telegram from Hell.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Good stuff. Yeah, I will admit to not being much of a Holmes scholar other than, Data on Star Trek. I hate to say it. That's my biggest stretch out of the character. But I'm intrigued, and I think I will. I am a bad reader. I'm not going to lie to you, but I'm reinvigorated
Always audiobooks.
Yes, I'm reinvigorated to go back and have a great look. Audiobooks is great because I work on the road when I'm not doing this. So
they're all on audiobook. The last 3. The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols, The Return of the Pharaoh, and Sherlock Holmes and the Telegram from Hell are all read by David Robb, who plays the Doctor on Downton Abbey, and he was in I, Claudius, and I directed him in a movie in India with Pierce Brosnan, Merchant Ivory, called The Deceivers, and we've been friends ever since. And I said, David, you have the perfect voice for Watson.
That's fantastic.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Good deal. All right. Well, good. Dig into a little bit of Star Trek, if that's okay with you. I know Peter has a question or 3.
Well, you know that Spock is descended from Holmes.
Oh, but of course.
Yes.
I can see it through and through.
But I mean, did you realize it when you watched The Undiscovered Country? He says it.
Yeah, I remember him saying it.
What did he say?
Oh, Peter, we're being asked to recite the script. He said an ancestor.
You guys are the Star Trek expert, right?
I got it. He says an ancestor of mine
as
on the
an
bridge.
ancestor of mine once said, whenever you, gosh, I get this quote right.
When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. This is when they're staring at the screen. The captain is on his way after the Klingon trial. Worf's grandfather didn't deliver the goods, and they're off to Repente. Got it. I caught up.
Okay.
Sorry that took a while, sir. Woo. Whew.
Where are you guys broadcasting from?
We are in Michigan. We live in West Michigan.
Oh, a battleground state.
A battleground state, yes. Unfortunately, Trump was here today, but we're not here to talk about politics. Yikes. But yeah, no. Anyway, let's segue back to talking about. I saw Star Trek 6 that came out when I was in high school, and holy cow, I was enthralled. But the thing that made us all crazy wild fans was Star Trek 2, without a doubt.
Yeah,
well, 6 is a political film. It definitely was meant to reflect the end of the Cold War and what Francis Fukuyama at Harvard suggested, that we had all reached the end of history.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy!
And so that, as Leonard explained to me when we were cooking up the idea of the movie, he said, the Klingons have always been our stand-ins for the Russians. And I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and I didn't know that much about Star Trek. So I said, oh, that was a direct quote. Oh. And so we went from there.
Sometimes the best things have the simplest beginnings.
Movies, when they work, are what we call happy accidents. Movies are like souffles. They either rise or they don't. And you, half the time, you never know why. If we knew why, they'd all be hits, wouldn't they? Yes. But...
Yeah, right. Especially in recent years in the box office. Holy cow.
Yeah. So I'm sure you've had this question multiple times and have told the story multiple times, but I'd just like to hear it from you since we got you. When you got involved with Star Trek, how did you find it? Or did they find you specifically to get involved with Star Trek 2?
I have a friend, since a childhood friend actually, named Karen Moore, who was an executive at Paramount, and I guess I had offices at Paramount. I can't remember, but she was at my house with another friend, and we were flipping burgers on a barbecue, and I was in a kind of a cranky mood because the script that I wanted to get made, nobody wanted to make, and I had directed one movie, which was Time After Time, and Karen said, if you want to learn how to direct, you should be directing and not sitting up here holding your breath. Why don't you come down to Paramount and meet Harve Bennett? I said, who's that? And she said, well, he did the $6 Million Man and Rich Man, Poor Man and Mod Squad. And he said, she said, he's in charge of making the second Star Trek movie. And I said, is that the one with the man with the pointy ears?
Awesome.
He said, don't be such a snob, Nikki. Go down and meet the guy. You might like him. So I did. And I did like him. I liked him a lot. And I don't remember, the afternoon that I sat in his office and he was breaking open cans of beer, and we were just sitting. And finally he said, have you ever seen any of this? And I said, well, I've breezed past it channel surfing, but it looked dopey to me, so I just kept going. And he said, well, let me show you the movie and we'll look at some of the episodes. So he did. And I think it's fair to say that when it was on and I watched it, and when I was about 18 or whatever, or tried to watch it, I missed everything that was important or remarkable about it. I missed the interracial cast. I missed women in positions of power. I missed a Russian officer as part of the whole thing. What it was trying to do had utterly blown by me because of the sets and the outfits and whatever.
True.
So, but in the back of my pea brain, it was reminding me of something that I really did like. And it took me, I don't know, another week before I said, oh, at 3 a.m. Oh, this reminds me of those books that I read when I was about 13 of the adventures of Captain Horatio Hornblower.
Nice.
Bingo.
Now you're not a reader, so you don't know those books.
Well,
I've
I mean,
read the first two.
through Star Trek, I know of it. So yes, shame on me. But yes, I do know that is the prototype of the swashbuckling Captain Kirk.
Well, he had a girl in every port, and he had lots of adventures. And you're 13. This is all sounding pretty appetizing.
Sure.
So I said, "Oh well, wait. This is Hornblower in outer space. I can do that. I can do that." And also, somewhere the phrase space opera was bandied about, and I am an opera fool. So the idea of putting Hornblower into a space opera uh, really rang a lot of bells for me. Um, and so I waited because Harv said he was going to send me the script, draft 5, I believe it was. And I waited and I waited, and there wasn't any. I finally called up. I said, Whatever happened to that Hornblower, Star Trek thing we were talking about?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, I can't send it to you. It's not good." And he had a more colorful expression, but
No, no.
and I said, "Well, why don't you send it to me anyway? Because how many? You said there are 5. Well, send them all over. I want to read them." Because I now had this space opera thing, up my tush, and so I am a very slow reader. So I sat down, and in those days, by the way, you didn't just hit send.
Yeah, yeah.
A truck drove
Mail
up.
Right. The mail. Oh my goodness.
It was more than 5, and I read them all, and then I invited Harv and his producing partner Robert Sallin to my house, and I pulled out a legal pad and I said, "Why don't we make a laundry list of everything that we like in these 5 scripts? Could be the major plot, it could be the subplot, could be a sequence, could be a scene, could be a character, could be one line of dialogue. I don't care. Let's just make the list." And then I'll write a new script and try to incorporate as many of these things as I can. And to make a long story short, that's what we did. So, Kirk meets his son, Khan, the Genesis Project, Lieutenant Savick, and I don't know what all else. And the one thing that sort of almost screwed up the whole works was that they said, well, we're so up against it now that if we don't have a script in 12 days, the special effects house can't guarantee delivery of the shots in time for the June opening. And I said, what June opening is that? And they said, oh yeah, well the movie's booked into theaters at something in June. I said, huh? How does that work? You book the movie into theaters and there's no movie? And this is only the second movie I was ever directing, so I didn't know how these things worked. But anyway, 12 days of no sleep and a lot of drugs.
And then you came up with one of the best movies that we've had. So.
Happy accidents.
Happy. Yeah, no, it absolutely blew the doors off. I myself was because I'm a child of the early 80s, it was everything was Star Wars. So it was not till I was a little bit older that I really caught a glimpse. I think my first Trek movie that I really saw in the theaters and embraced was the 4th one. But then that leads you back to watch all the other ones. And Wrath of Khan is quote unquote normal people who are not big Trekkers like we are will see, hey, boy, that one with Khan with the spaceship stuff and all the explosions, everything you did with that film. And it was very famously done, in some ways on a shoestring budget and the things you were able to accomplish. I don't even know where to begin. It's
well, I have a theory. my theory is that art thrives on restrictions. It's when you are forced to be clever, usually for financial and budgetary concerns, that you start finding creative solutions as opposed to simply throwing money at something. The movie that really changed my life was the Laurence Olivier movie of Henry V. You've seen the movie?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that movie was made in the middle of World War II. It was made for about $1.75.
Probably
England,
literally.
England was flat on its back, and they were trying to make a movie that prepped everybody for D-Day. And that guy wrote the best dialogue, so they decided to make that. And it's a play that acknowledges very much at the very beginning the limitations of the theater. Can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? Or may we cram within this circle the casks that did affright the air at Agincourt? On your imaginary forces work. Think, when we speak of them, that you see horses planting their proud hoofs in the receiving earth, for 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings. And so the movie starts as a play. And then bit by bit by bit, it becomes more and more cinematic and real until they threw every nickel that they had into the battle. And then it's a full-blown battle and, fantastic. And then from the battle onwards, it becomes more and more theatrical until at the end, we're back in the playhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And so that movie just taught me so many lessons. I played hooky from school to see it because I never understood Shakespeare in class. And I suddenly thought, wait a minute, this is the best writer. That guy's the best actor. This is the best movie. And I just sat there till the theater closed. It never occurred to me to go to the payphone in the lobby and tell my parents where I was. So I didn't get out till midnight.
Oh my God. Oh no.
I was bad. But that gave me the idea that art can thrive on restrictions. So when I was making Time After Time, this is a story about young H.G. Wells, who travels from his house in London in 1893, I think it is, to 1979. And he finds himself at the other end of his journey in 1979 in a museum exhibit dedicated to him. It's a museum exhibit about H.G. Wells. So having written the script and now we're planning the movie, and yes, we need a bunch of sets to be Wells's apartment in London, where the movie begins. And then we got to the place where, oh gosh, we have to build a whole museum exhibit to be his exhibit. And then I'm saying, hang on, wait a minute. What if we just took everything from his house in London set and just mixed them up a little bit and put labels on them? Couldn't that be the H.G. Wells exhibit?
Right.
And then I was learning how to skin the cat. Is you make your limitations into your strength. And then I took it one step further. I said, oh, wait. Supposing when he shows up in the museum exhibit, gets out of his time machine, he realizes he's forgotten something back home in 1893. And he rummages around and he can find it in the exhibit, his glasses. He loses his glasses when he time travels, but when he pulls open the desk drawer in the museum exhibit, there's his spare pair of glasses. So that's thinking with less money.
Right. Oh my gosh. That's awesome. I've got to go back and rewatch that one. It has been a long, long time. So holy cow, Peter! I'll grab the wheel back here. I wanna ask you about, and I will admit this was one of those watching a retrospective of great films of the '80s or cultural events of the '80s. ABC's The Day After from 1983. I had never seen it in 1983. I was 7. Sorry, betray my age, but I was blown away. And the success of it, 100 million people watching it in one night, and nominated for 14 Emmys, is staggering. I mean, I didn't do a ton of research on it at the time, but how did that come to pass?
Well, let me work backwards a little bit.
Please.
Yes, the statistics about the movie, and it was more than 100 million. It was also shown in the Soviet Union. It was shown in Cuba, and it's a very effective movie. It's a blunt instrument. Let's face it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the thing that it did, about which I am the most proud, is that it changed Ronald Reagan's mind about a winnable nuclear war. It sent Ronald Reagan off to Reykjavik to sit down with Premier Gorbachev and to sign the Intermediate Missile Range Treaty, which, as Daniel Ellsberg pointed out to me, is the only treaty that ever resulted in the physical dismantling of nuclear weapons. Of course, the pussy grabber in chief has recently walked out of that treaty, so we don't have it. But if I had to name the most worthwhile thing I ever got to do with my life, was to get everybody to start dismantling some of these ridiculous weapons. Anyway, the origin of it was a man named Brandon Stoddard, who was the head of ABC Circle Films. And he had a big hit series called Roots, based on the book by Alex Haley.
One of my all-time favorites.
And he was looking for a follow-up to Roots. He was looking for event television. And at that time, there was a nuclear meltdown at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. And it happened the same week that a movie called The China Syndrome came out.
Oh, yeah. I saw that recently too, believe it or not. I know I'm way behind the curve.
Well, he got it into his head. What about a movie about nuclear war? What would it be like? Not taking political sides, just what would it be like? And everybody at ABC, the television network, without exception, hated this idea with a passion. They hated this idea, and they knew quite correctly, they predicted, we will have no sponsors. No one will sponsor this show. And Brandon, who's no longer alive, just rolled the dice, put everything on, and there were death threats ultimately against his life. This, a note on his windshield, this could have been a bomb, and so on and so on and so forth. None of which I knew at the time, by the way. I didn't know any of that. And they rooted around looking for an event television director. And I believe I was the third person, maybe I was the fourth person to be offered this. And people turned it down for various reasons, but I think the real reason and the real problem with nuclear war generally and dealing with it is that nobody wants to think about it.
Right.
In the words of George Bush, let's go shopping. It's too upsetting. We all know that these weapons are out there, that we exist, by a sort of fraying thread or something, but we don't want to think about it. But as Daniel Ellsberg said, hope is not a strategy. Luck is not a strategy. So there I am, director number 4, whatever it was, and I was being, psychoanalyzed at the time. and you lie down on a couch and you say whatever comes into your head for 10 years. And if you're lucky, it does you some good. And I was very lucky. And I was lying on the couch and trying to talk my way out of doing this movie because I didn't want to think about nuclear war either. Had directed 2 hit movies by this point. There were lots of girls, and I was having a really good time. So I would sit there on the couch, lie there, and say, "Well, if you direct features, you're not supposed to go off and do television. That's like a step down." And I had all these reasons, and he didn't talk much, my shrink. But he finally opened his mouth and said, in one of my silences, "Well, I think this is where we find out who you really are."
Oh, wow.
That was checkmate. And that's how I wound up doing the movie.
Wow. It was
wriggle off that hook.
Absolutely incredible piece of work. So, oh my gosh. All right. Well, Peter, I think you are rounding us down, talking a little, had some other thoughts about things related to Star Trek, and I think that's our time. But take it away.
All right. So there have been kind of some hints since 2017, and I think you've talked about this a couple times on a couple different events and podcasts. But the project for Khan on City Alpha 5, the last I heard, it was going to be an audio drama, which I quite find fascinating. I work on one, a very little fan project, but would you be able to tell us anything about that? If there's anything new, or if you had it as writing, or
yes. The good news is that I think it's coming along. I think they've cast somebody as Khan. It originally was 3 one-hour movies for television that I wrote. They were movies. And then those movies didn't get made because the model they wanted more. I don't remember what they wanted. But it sat there. And then with the rise of radio plays, you ever notice we live in a world of euphemisms?
Yes, sir.
We don't call them radio plays, we call them podcasts.
Guilty.
We what was it? We don't call it perfume for boys, it's aftershave.
Yes, sir.
We don't call it, what is it, dolls for boys, it's action figures.
Oh, you don't see all the ones on the other side of my camera here, so we'll just leave that go.
So anyway, it became a podcast, and I worked on it for quite a while. All I can say is that there's a lot of cooks in that kitchen.
No boy.
Yeah, that's
right. So we'll see what the result is.
Oh my gosh. Interesting. Anything else in the Star Trek world that you're touching, that you're thinking about, that you'd love to do?
Well, Dr. Johnson said a man is a blockhead who writes for any reason other than money.
Fair.
I got it.
So, but it's really changed since I worked on what became The Wrath of Khan. There are so many cooks in the kitchen now. There's so many. It's almost done like chatbot or something. There are so many boxes that have to be checked. And the 3 movies that I worked on, and I wrote most of 4 as well, which we haven't really discussed. But those 3 movies, I was pretty much left alone. At most, it was me and Harv, on 2. On 4, it was me, Harv, and Leonard.
Mm-hmm.
And on 6, it was me and Leonard. And everybody was too busy with other shit to pay any attention to us. And it's not like that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's
Right.
CBS, there's Paramount, there's the Realm, the production house for the radio. Sorry, the podcast. So it's different, and it's a lot
It's kind of
harder
top-heavy
to.
executives almost, which everyone's trying to change things or.
Yeah, if
do it.
everybody doesn't have an opinion, why are they being paid?
Yeah.
Right. Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, this has been. I almost don't have the words. This has been truly an honor. This has been. I haven't learned this much since I was back in school, and that was a very long time ago. So, my gosh, Mr. Meyer, thank you so much for giving us this time. Tell us, once again, how people find you out there in the world, digitally, on the internet, as it were, or in real life. Yes, that great big book. That's awesome. Comes out August 27.
I have a website. It's nicholas-meyer.com.
Excellent. And the book is, of course, available, in the real world at all fine booksellers and on the dreaded Amazon.com. I didn't say dreaded. I wouldn't say dreaded if they sponsored us, but I know I use them too. And digitally, and an audiobook as well, I would imagine. I hope.
Yeah, the audiobook, as I said, was recorded by David Robb.
Very good.
Who recorded the previous 2. And he's my Watson of choice.
Awesome. Excellent. Fantastic. Very good. Well, Mr. Meyer, once again, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our listeners. And take care. Appreciate it.
Good luck. Thanks for having me.
You bet.